Hello and welcome. We're happy to have you here. So I'd like to welcome you to the DoD CIO Cyber Workforce Center session workshop. We have two representatives here with us from the Office of the Department of Defense CIO, and they're going to be focusing mostly on two initiatives. One, our Cyber Workforce Strategy, and that's that recent publication, and the 8140 Manual on Workforce Qualifications. So we're really pleased today to have with us two of our key representatives that highlight cyber workforce. Directly on my left here is Mr. Mark Gorek. He is the Principal Director for Resource and Analysis with the DoD CIO. And then the immediate boss of me, Patrick Johnson. He's the Workforce Innovation Director. So please join me in welcoming these gentlemen.
All right, Star, thank you. Can you all hear me? Good? Okay, I'll move it closer. Now you can hear me, okay. So great to see so many familiar faces. Just want to thank AFCEA for giving us this opportunity. So there's a number on the screen there. I'm going to make this more interactive. Anybody know what that number means? What's that? So you were there earlier today, weren't you? 30,000. 30,000 is the number of vacancies DoD has for our cyber and IT workforce. Not a trivial number. So part of what we're trying to do is how do we get after that? How do we fix it? Because to date, we've actually not been keeping up with the demand. The demand is increasing at a far higher pace than what we're able to produce. So we actually need all of your help to make this happen. And I view this not as a competition between industry, federal, and then within DoD. I look at it as we're all in this together. To me, this is a national security challenge. It's an international problem, but we need to fix this from all avenues, from K through 12, from industry, from our private and public sectors in order to get after this problem. So next slide. So we're going to talk to you about a couple things. We'll make it more informal if that's okay with you all. We'll have questions as we go, and then we'll take, of course, questions at the end. So here's kind of what we're going to cover. I'm not going to read a slide to you, but next slide. So let's start off with our mission and vision statement. And I want to focus on the vision statement, because to me this is where we want to go. So how do we create a cyber workforce that's the most capable and dominant force in the world? Okay, that's a very aspirational mission, and I don't know if we'll ever get there, but if we don't try, then we'll never get anywhere. So in anticipation of this new mission, we formed the Workforce Innovation Directorate under the DoD CIO. So Patrick is the director of that directorate. And we did that on purpose because the way we've always been doing things doesn't seem to be working. So we need to do things differently. And what does that mean and what does that look like? I don't have all the answers. But we started with a workforce strategy, and now we're going to do the implementation plan. By the way, the 8140 manual came out, that's our qualification, 1 week before our cyber strategy, and our implementation plan is due out this summer. So that will be key. It's in chord right now with all the organizations. So to me, the strategy is great, and you can see the pillars there and what we're after, right? Recruitment, identification, retention, and then development or training. So that's what we're after, okay, but you could go back to our strategy 10 years ago and see very similar words. The key is, how do you get after that? And that's all in the implementation plan. So right now we have about 41 specific programs that we're going to try to implement within the DoD. And they're going to be new and different. And you know what? Most of them are going to fail. And that's okay. I'm all for that, trying something different and new. So that's the key to the implementation plan. And of course, we'll measure it over time, and we'll see if it's successful. And if it's not, we're going to try new things. So it's going to be a more of an adaptive implementation plan over time. Next slide. So to me, this starts off with data. I can't answer many questions about DoD unless I understand our workforce. Data is the key to understand that. That's what feeds all of these. If I don't know my retention rates, I don't know my recruitment shortfall, I don't know where I'm short, I don't know the specialties that I need more training in, or what I need to train, I can't answer any of these questions. So we've spent a lot of time in the last 3 years developing our data sources, which we read from all of our components. So it's not our data, we just consolidate it at the OSD level. And if you think that's easy to do, you haven't worked in DoD. Each of the services have separate systems that don't talk to each other, and they look at manpower, which are like authorizations, the spaces, and you have the personnel systems, which are the faces. Those two don't talk. Well, we've incorporated them all in and then did that integration and crosstalk, so then we know our shortfalls. That's great for today. That doesn't help me get to tomorrow. And tomorrow I need to know, well, that's great. It gives me my requirements of today, but what are my requirements in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years? Because that's really what I have to answer from my level, right? The fight for today is at the organizational level. The fight for OSD is at the next 2 to 4 year challenge. So I don't have that picture yet. We're still developing that, but at least I have the fundamentals. I can actually answer to you that I have 30,000 shortfall. I have a 225,000 person workforce. And by the way, for those interested, that splits up evenly. When I look at the workforce, I look at MIL, all three components, civilians, and my contractor workforce. Because again, to me, we're a partnership in this. None of those areas can do it alone. We all do it together. So that's our workforce. It's about 1/3 each, about 75K each. So pretty good balance there, we think. What the exact number is, I don't know. I know it's more. So that's my usual typical answer when anybody asks me. It's more. So that data feeds all of those initiatives, and then overall we have the cyber workforce on top of that. Next slide. So how do we actually get after this? And this is something I didn't realize that not everybody knows. Everybody has heard of the NICE framework. Okay, well, the NICE framework was established, what, 3 years ago?
About 2017.
2017, so about 5 years ago. And it is today, I believe, what it was in 2017. Ours, we call it the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework, has been iterative. So actually every quarter we look at this and adjust it. So we have gone from 50 plus work roles up to a total of 71 now. We've added, in the last quarter we added software. 2 quarters ago we added AI and data. And in doing that, we also modified our original 50 plus work roles to keep up with the current challenges, to keep up with the current knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks required to actually do this job. Because as all of you know, those are changing. So I work in the AI space, I'm a data scientist. When I did AI 3 years ago, it was one algorithm for a huge data set. 2 years later, I can do 100 algorithms for one data set. Now, I'm doing algorithms of algorithms. So the technology, as you all realize, is at a much faster pace than what we're keeping up with. However, using this as a flexible, adaptive, and responsive system to our workforce, we can hone in on the skills that we need, the shortages we have, and then incentivize the shortages that we see as most critical. So this gives us very nice, tight fidelity on our workforce and where we see the biggest problems. And also we work with our mission partners, operators across the field, to identify and help, we're responsive to their needs of where they're seeing the biggest shortfalls and where they need help. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Patrick, and he'll talk more about the workforce framework.
Okay, so everybody hear me? The workforce framework is really important for us in that it's the underpinning of the strategy. It's really the underpinning of what we're going about. And if you look at the 3 components within, so we have our contractor workforce, our military workforce, and civilian workforce, the civilian workforce is not managed like our military workforce. So in terms of succession planning, talent management, they have that line and they do a pretty good job on it. Now, there are some challenges over there on the retention side of the house, but in the cyber workforce, recruiting on the military side of the house is much stronger than, say, the civilians. And because the civilian workforce relies on the OPM qualification series and other things, it's not very robust and it's outdated. How did we look at this in its totality and get a complete picture? Because I have people in the military and the civilian world doing the same thing, different titles. How do we line that up? So where are my true shortfalls? So in looking at the DCWF, when the NICE framework first came out, we helped shape that. Then we begin to look at it in a different light and say, let's move beyond just compliance and let's put this to work as a human capital shaping tool. And this is something even on the industry side. If we wanted that kind of granularity, you could use it like that. I'd like to believe that industry has it all figured out and they have no problem targeting their talent and moving out. I've learned since then, not always true, all right? So maybe this is a collaborative idea we can share, and anything you see, because we're about collaboration, take it, use it, go be successful. Don't need credit for it. If it works for you, great, all right? So when we started looking at this, one of the things we wanted to look at, how can we use this to shape the tool? Next slide. So this is a pretty simple slide, but we've got about 47,000 2210s. That is an IT specialist within the government. And within DoD, there's 47,000 positions. Only about 35,000 of those are currently filled. Now, if we're looking at that, that's about a 24% vacancy rate, and I've got 11,000 plus vacancies we need to try and fill on that. So we understand that having a certain level of vacancy or turnover is a good thing. We have to kind of find our sweet spot, and what are we willing to pay to bring that down? So if I'm looking simply at the occupational series as a whole, I've got to go after that 24%, and I wind up incentivizing a lot of people to try to bring that down. But the fact of the matter is, when we disaggregate the data and look at the workforce, I can see that actually there's about 20 work roles, because there's 52 work roles assigned to my 2210s. That's how diverse it is, because you're thinking about 2210 as OPM defines it, and it's like, well, they do this. Actually, they do 52 different things, and I'm proving that in terms of assigning the work roles. So let's pick those work roles which are most critical. And this highlights some of those in which you see vacancy rates extremely high. So we're gonna set the bar, it's kind of high. I want to drop that vacancy rate under 15%. How do I go about doing that? Next slide, please. Well, the first thing I do is I need data. And that was the one thing at the enterprise level for our civilian workforce that was missing. By coding our workforce, now I can see across the board. And not only can I see on the civilian side, but I can track these same work roles on the military side, and I can see where we're filling some of those gaps with military personnel and accepting risks on the civilian side. So we're focusing on our highest, and those are my top 20 vacancy rates. And when I add those numbers up, I come out with a little over 4,000. And okay, what would that do if I just incentivized that bucket of people? How would it move the ball on it? Next slide. So if we're looking at it, all right, some of you may have heard OPM is taking a look at special salary rates. And according to the OPM formula, the special salary rates would cost the department, if we incentivized everyone as proposed, over $700 million. There are other occupational series in there, but that's not sustainable or practical for the department. And is it the best way to spend our money? Do I want to pay somebody that was going to stay anyhow? Because I don't know about you, but if I was going to stay anyway and you paid me extra money, I'm like, thank you, I'm all in. But that's not necessarily what we need to do. So if I'm looking at this, what if I just want to attack those 11,000 vacancies and kind of spot on that? Well, if I do that, I'm still at $165 million on an annual basis, and then we know that that increases as we go across the FIDAP. The best approach, if I look at just those 4,000, go back one slide, that's highlighted here, okay, switch back. I get my vacancy rate under 15%. And then if I want to tighten that, because anytime you start moving things around with incentives, all right, it takes time. People don't respond instantly. You've got to measure the effect, see where you're going, and the whole time I'm doing this at a cost of about 80% less than where we started with, at a little over 60 million. Now that is sustainable, and as we get healthy, then you can look at what do I need to turn off and turn on and change. Now this doesn't apply just to incentives, but this applies to training, this applies to career pathing. When I'm looking at my force in industry, if you have an overage, you look at your people and you say, who can I retrain, upskill, and shift over here, because this is where the market is taking us now, this is where our mission is now. And we need that ability on the civilian workforce on that side of it. And this opens that aperture up. And while it's not a radical idea, it is when it's coming out of the department, because our civilian workforce is kind of set in concrete. Right? You join, you get your job, and that's where you were going to be for 30 years. That paradigm has shifted, and we have to shift our thinking with it. And that's why when Mark said, we're going to try things that we know will probably not work, that's okay, because it doesn't mean we give up. It means if that didn't work, what's the next thing in the bucket? So there's 22 objectives, 41 initiatives that we've got on the board through 2027. And by working with our stakeholders, we feel very, very strongly that we can get to where we need to be, measuring data and output along the way. Next slide.
Just real quick before you go to the next slide. So if you look at the far right on that, it's still $61 million. So everyone in this room knows it's worth it to spend that money to increase this workforce. My friends and partners within the department, especially in the 8 shops and the budget shops, do not necessarily agree that spending $61 million in this workforce is the right thing to do for the money. So even though we have the data to show it, it still requires partnerships within the department to show them that we need to do this. And it is fight for resources. I know all of you think the DoD has all the money in the world. We do have a lot of money, but it's also already taken. So, and if you look to the future of our budgets, they're not going up. So they're stagnant, or we're losing against inflation. So how do we best balance it? And again, using data is my approach to get to the 8s and the 1s to convince them that this is a program we have to do.
And I think over the next year to 2 years in the fiscal arena, budgets are going to tighten, and we have to really do a precision look at our gaps and what we have, because you're not going to have unlimited resources to kind of dump it at these things. And frankly, I would rather target and track and move things that are measurable than dump cash and where I can't really discern what the impact of that was over the long term. Next slide. This is just a quick overview of where our framework is at right now. Adding AI and data is an important subset, because we're looking at the AI workforce both on the military side of the house and the civilian side. There is no specialty designed to say this is AI, this isn't. By doing this, this lets us start marking that workforce in its current state. And Mark mentioned it, being able to benchmark what you have, your as is critical before you start projecting out for a future workforce. And what that workforce needs to look like, I will tell you, no one has that answer. They may tell you they do, but they don't. All right, what we have to build is the flexibility and a flexible workforce that's adaptive. That needs to be the key. Not the workforce that has that skill set, but the ability to acquire the skill set we don't even know they need yet. And that's going to be our focus as we're moving along. Next slide.
And real quick before you go on, go back. So one of the things we try to do within, first of all, how many people have seen the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework? Raise your hands. Okay, more than half of you. So you must have come to our talks as we travel FCA here. Each of these work roles is defined by knowledge, skills, abilities, and tasks, which then tie into our certification and qualification manual. This is a framework, okay? The Office of the National Cyber Director is going to put out their strategy here shortly. You could say we've helped a lot with that strategy. This is a framework. We're trying to tie our KSATs with industry. So we have a common lexicon across not only the DoD, but the federal government as well as industry. So if I'm looking for an offensive cyber operator, everyone knows the skills required, the training required, the tasks required to complete that mission set. So it's a framework. So there's a methodology behind here. It's not trivial to come up with these, and it's even harder to get all the organizations within all the components within DoD, for instance, or the organizations to code this workforce, which means they have to look at every single position, not occupational series, but what they're actually doing, and code it in one of these work roles. Okay, that is a lot of work. And that's what this team has been doing for the last 4 years to make this happen. So it doesn't happen overnight. Like I said, we just did AI, data, and software. There's not one coded position to date yet for those. So we're still working with the components to make that happen. We can't do it. They have to do it. So
I was going to say, fortunately, our partners with both R&E and CDAO are getting ready to launch that initiative. And fortunately, we're expecting it because of what we have done for them to have a much easier path going forward and then being able to put the things into the system. So we're going to be watching that intently, working with them in every way we can. All right, next slide. So this is the second part, and when we talk about developing the workforce, so when we say the DCWF, we use that for identification and shaping retention, but if we look at in terms of the qualification, then that is the development and helping retain that workforce. So when we look at the qualification program, it's critical because simply putting out that information and saying, okay, now go qualify the workforce, how do we do that and structure that so it's repeatable across the board, and also recognize that organizations have their own needs and then focus on capability, all right, demonstrated capability. Ultimately, what we want to do, and this is what we're looking hard at, is move away from certifications. Training is always going to be necessary, education is always going to be necessary, but ideally, I don't care what certification you have, I don't care what training you have, if you can walk in and demonstrate the capability to perform the job, then you're qualified. That's where we should be, all right? And that's going to take some time to get there, but that is where we're leaning forward. So your job interview could be, I'm going to bring you in and you've got an 8-hour test and you're going to put you in your environment, and for 8 hours you're going to perform the job that you would be doing, all right? And if they can do that and do that successfully, then there's no question in my mind, are they qualified, right? And the ability to kind of track that, we already have capability like that now on the commercial side. It's how do we marry that up and offer that opportunity so employers on the government side, we certainly do this on the commercial side, especially in software and some other areas, they have a series of ranges or test labs you have to get through just to get to the application process. They can weed it down. So depending on where we're coming from, there's a lot of lessons to be learned there. Right? For now, our certifications and training, our education are critical, right? They will always be, but the reliance won't be on your certification is, you know, you got to go back and take this test. No, on an annual basis, you need to come in here and demonstrate this capability. And if we want to see people get better, I need you to demonstrate the capability at the next higher level. Let's see if you can do that. So that's kind of the direction we're going, not kind of, it is the direction we're going. What I've discovered is a lot of people interested in that. They're like, yeah. And I'm like, great, what do you got? We're waiting for you to build it. So that's coming because we are in touch with a few groups and we're looking at this, and I'm looking by 2027, we should have something that looks a lot like what I'm describing now, right? There is, if you go back to the first slide in terms of the 4 pillars, and then the goals. There were 4 goals underneath that. Goal 3, if you remember, was cultural change. And what we're doing, culture doesn't change on its own, and it doesn't change rapidly. So it's about changing the culture, and how you do that, you can do it with a club. You will not be successful. You will be the one that gets clubbed in the end. You can try to kind of go under the radar. They normally find out. And then you can try to co-opt your stakeholders, right? Show our stakeholders this is the value for taking this initiative and following this path. And that's the approach we're trying to take. So culture change is slow. It takes me time to change your mind. And if I can't, and if what I'm selling doesn't appeal to you, then my message is wrong, we're doing something wrong. That's why we say we're willing to make mistakes and come back, talk to the stakeholder, what is it you want to see, right? What are your residential requirements? What do you need? How do I give you the things you want? If you go back to our mission statement, that mission statement talks about, you know, we're OSD. I don't necessarily do, but we provide you the tools, the policy, and the oversight so you can accomplish the mission. And I'm really focused on providing you with the tools. That's what I want to give you in order to accomplish the mission. Next slide. we're almost up to the last slide. And so when 8140 went out, we have about 150 certifications and training offerings in the hopper. You see 71 work roles. Of those, 55 are dedicated to the cyberspace operation. The others are set for software and software engineering, AI, and data. Now, other PSAs, the CDAO, R&E, are going to come and help kind of shape some of those training, and we'll work with them. But from our standpoint, I want you to have about as many options to train your workforce as possible. What does that mean? I don't want you to have one certificate or two certificates on the option. That's all you've got, because one certificate's going to be expensive, and two, it may not meet everything you want. So the idea is to open up the aperture. The way we do it right now in terms of certification, there's a process, it's deliberative, there's a third-party assessor, and it takes about 4 to 6 months to get your offering approved and aligned to 8140. That's not going to work, because I want to take those 150 offerings and I want to move that to 1,000 to 2,000 offerings or more. And the idea behind that, each work role should have a catalog of 10 to 15 separate options, whether it's training, whether it's education, because right now a lot of times you send somebody to school, they come out, well, you don't have the certification, so you have to go back and get the certification. Let's take that off the table. Let's look at everything that's done, the totality of the individual, and then measure what is qualified. So we're looking at how we do that for education, we're looking at how we do that for training. We've got the training and the certification done. This is an automated process, right, with AI on the back end, and it will allow the cert provider, it's going to be open to the public. We'll be opening it up actually here in the next couple of weeks, the URL for that, where you simply go in, you have your offerings, and you load that information in and work the system itself. And we had to go and get special permission to use this, all right? In other words, delegate this down so we can approve this going through this process, but it's designed to provide some rigidity, repeatability, and be fair to all. So if you want an opportunity to have your offerings, and what this will do is it puts you in the course catalog. No, I'm not buying the training ourselves. It is up to the components and our stakeholders to look at that and say, oh, I could use that because it is aligned to 8140 and it's been validated. And that's what we're trying to do with that. So the idea is to validate as many different offerings as we can to allow the services and our stakeholders the flexibility. You may decide that training works best for your workforce. You may select a group of certifications in that series that may work best. It's a matter of what works best, what fits your budget the best, and as we go, then we hope to kind of rate some of these, so then you can see from the services perspective, this training or this offering was superior, just like what we do if you look on your various sites when you're shopping, there's a rating on there, there's an idea in terms of cost. You should be able to do that comparison up front from a training perspective as a stakeholder or as a component. And I think with that,
so before we go, so we covered a lot of information in 30 minutes here. Just to recap quickly, we published the workforce strategy. We used the Defense Cyber Workforce Framework to help us populate our data and identify our workforce. We then published the 8140 policy series, this manual which does our qualifications of each of those work roles. The one area we really didn't talk about is cyber accepted service. That's also another tool in our kit bag, and with that, incentives that go with that smaller program. So that's kind of what we've been up to in the last year plus, and we need you as partners, right? Even that last slide on our qualification to come up with those qualification standards. We need partners with industry to come up with our assessments and organizations. How does that look? By the way, other fields in DoD already do this, right? Doctors have to get certified every year. Lawyers have to maintain their currency. So it's not a new thing, but we've never done that in our technical workforce. We hire for life based on the skills you had when you were hired, at least on the civilian side. On the military side, we actually do a great job of keeping up with training because we have constantly training in order to get promoted and move up and new things. Civ side, we have not kept up. So this is just one methodology to do that. So with that, we have half an hour left here. We're going to open it up to questions. If you could come up to the mic so everybody could hear you, that would be great. Oh, if we could turn on the mic. There's a little button on the bottom.
There we go. We have sound. Hi, my name is Sandra Schneider. I'm the president of Security University. We've been around for 25 years. Hoorah! I'm so thrilled to see qualifying the workforce is a critical component to cyber education. I have one question. I probably have 1,000 questions, but I'm going to limit it to one. It used to be that ANSI was a part of the process. Are you saying, based on going to the portal, putting your information in, that the program no longer has to be ANSI approved?
Actually, we do rely still on ANSI accreditation. There's steps in there, and when you go into the portal and you start entering your information, the first phase is basically you're showing you're interested. The second phase moves you into how interested and then details the level of information we need. And ANSI accreditation is a question and block in there. So there has to be...
So there's still a $20,000 to $60,000 limit, restriction to being eligible. ANSI is at best, at the least, 27.
There has to be a standard out there coming from that, and it's not the definer, but that's part of the entry into it.
We can have a discussion. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Rain Rasul, Senior Director of GDIT. My question has to do with, I want to understand the latter part of your comments on qualifications. You're saying that there's a portal and, for lack of a better description, OJT, and you go in and demonstrate your skill set.
Can you hear?
On-job training. But so are certs being phased out or in lieu of? Or?
Not yet. And that, what I was talking about in terms of demonstrating capability, okay, there's different systems that can do that right now, okay, but we have not settled on one of those, because anytime we go into something like this, we have to get 200 stakeholders concurrence. Every one of them has a veto, right? And it's almost like we're working for somebody that's a little bipolar, all right, in terms of, I need this, and then when you present the pie, it's the wrong pie. I don't want it anymore. So we've got a lot of work to do, but the concept is already out there, all right? Capture the packet, CyberBit, all right? The nice challenge. Different things when you look at this where we offer almost a lab or a range, because in this arena, it's all ones and zeros. So you can actually set up a scenario where you're doing, especially for cyber IT and cybersecurity, they're actually doing the work. And that's what we want to strive, and that's what we want to get to, because some people test really well. And then when you ask them to do something simple on the computer, they're like, I need somebody to come reboot it for me. That's not what it's supposed to be, because you can test, but can't demonstrate the capability. We kind of separate that out, all right? That doesn't do away with the training or the certification setup, because you got to learn it somewhere. But we're seeing, and this is coming from our work with the National Cyber Director, looking at the proposals put forward, how do we not eliminate the paper ceiling, but make it complementary, all right? Because training teaches us what to do now, education teaches us how to think. And what do we want for a workforce in the future? We want them to be able to think, be flexible and adaptable, because I have no idea what the next disruptive technology is going to look like and how that's going to impact our capabilities. So kind of get that mix. For our immediate term, we're looking at in terms of training and being able to demonstrate capability now, that would put a huge dent if we had that in place on those 30,000 vacancies. We could start saying, boom, this individual even doesn't have the certification or other things, but they demonstrated the capability from a requirement standpoint. I'm like, put them to work.
Yes, sir, and I can appreciate that, because we went through that with Now4. I had people that have been working for like 15, 20 years, but couldn't pass the second class for whatever reason, right? And that was industrial knowledge, that was capability, and the synergy was there, but we had to adhere to the guidelines of.
And that was some of the complaints we heard. It's like, look, it cost me X number of dollars to do this. You have to have a measuring stick. You have to be able to measure the proficiency of your workforce. And so by looking at certifications training, both military and civilian, right, we can account for that. And then looking at education offerings, and we also acknowledge experience. That's the totality of the individual. When you're interviewing somebody, unlike in the federal government, well, you don't have 52 weeks or you don't have a year at this, so we can't advance you onto that. You're looking at everything they've done when you measure the worth and the contribution of that person to your organization in the future. So it should be, from a training approach, kind of look at everything they've done and then give them an opportunity to demonstrate that capability. Still have to develop that, so we're going to rely on the others, the training, the certification, we'll rely on that, but more to follow. I think once it takes off, it will change the way we kind of qualify, especially on the civilian workforce, the way we qualify it.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me expand on that a little bit. Part of your question, sir, was also about retention. And I've always said this in public, that I don't necessarily want to retain everybody, right? I want to retain the highest performers and the best workers who can actually do their job. So an annual assessment, an annual certification, something like that will help us with our retention, I'll say, challenges. So high retention numbers to me don't necessarily mean a good workforce. So we have to get after that performance metric.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Major Joshua James. I lead a CPT. Major Joshua James, I lead a cyber protection team on the National Guard side, so I do actually dual hat on this. But my question today is actually regarding the uniform side of things, since you did bring that up, and I want to bring up CAPE pay instead of cyber accepted pay, right? So I've got a team that's actually currently mobilized. Nobody's getting CAPE pay because of the work roles that they're in. Has anybody considered tying CAPE to MOS qualifications versus the work roles they're tied to, because they were
When you say CAPE pay,
cyber incentive pay.
all right.
Yeah, your Army?
Yes.
Okay. Because each of the services are slightly different. So we don't control that,
Okay.
but I would not advocate for MOS 17 series pay. I would advocate for the work role pay for the same reasons we have for 2210s. Now, having said that, if you're short in that field, the actual work they're doing, you need to bring that up to your organization to bring it up to us, and we'll consider that for incentive pay. So that's the way we do it. Now, we have a much more control over the civilian side. Each of the service and components control their mill side. So we can only recommend to the mill side and your pay authorities to pay those pays for certain things. We can't mandate it.
But it's crucial, right? You get your data tight, because if you can show the attrition rate and your vacancy rates are off and it's impacting you, it doesn't take long from a commander's perspective to say, I need to make a change and you need to help that. And you're at the heart of the mission force, so you should garner attention. I think we have, was it 32 teams? That sounds about right. So, and the Guard in particular is crucial to that. I've also heard on the other side, you can talk to your recruiters trying to move some of the folks from the active side. It's taking quite a while to make that transition to the point where we're losing some of them because they couldn't find a place to fill. There is some initiatives at Cyber Command where we're looking at that and finding ways to better streamline that pipeline, because if you're not going to stay in the active component, I don't care what the mission is, I got it, right? You're not going to stay there. Why wouldn't I shift you there? And we know that, we can identify that 6 months out, right? That person is getting ready to move. Why wouldn't I hand walk them in with white gloves? Welcome to your new reserve unit or your Guard unit, and make it as feasible as possible. So. No, I exactly know where you're coming from. And the incentive pay, that is an issue in particular with Army at the levels they can pay. If you talk to MNRA they're going to tell you, well, I don't have the numbers. You got to tell us. And you're thinking that's really your job to look at that, but that's not necessarily how they see that. So it's a collaboration. Look, they're not trying to do anything to hinder you. Help them get the data, and you'll be surprised.
Quick follow-up. Is there a place to provide comments or recommendations on 8140, like future 8140 offerings or the matrices as far as how the work roles are set up? Because I didn't see it in the 8140 itself.
So there is, and we do that through the swag, and we generally do it through our functional community standpoint. I know you're looking at it from the cyber protection teams, not aligned to Cyber Command's work roles. We're working with Cyber Command right now to take and bring that in and bring those two aligned. They were aligned, but you have changed, all right? I think you're on your 5th iteration and didn't stay synced up. But we're resyncing those because we tie incentives to the work roles. And so we're really excited. We're hoping to bring that to a vote in July to say, yay, verily, these are the 13 or the 14. I think you're at 14, right?
I believe so.
All right, so bring those 14 over. There may be some duplication we have to work out, but other than that, I'm not going to raise too much of a fuss. If you, the operational folks, have said this is what it should look like, you're the experts. We're going to take that and put it into the system.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.
Continuing on the Cybercom theme, when I read the latest 8140, it looks like it was going down the road of potentially looking and smelling a lot like Cybercom JQRs. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, yes, it is. So we actually went to the JQRs, and it helped build what we were doing. Note to self, if you're qualified with Cybercom JQRs, you don't have to worry about our baseline certifications because that is here. I'm not going to make our operational force, our mission force folks, go down and take these. No need. You're already at this level. So it doesn't have as big an impact on the mission folks because of the JQRs you already have to meet.
Yeah, so it's kind of adopting that JQR methodology for the rest of the cyber workforce.
That is exactly right.
Excellent, thank you.
I think you can just take it out there.
I'm not going to mess with that.
No, you can just take it out.
We'll do that. Like I'm hosting a game show. So, going back to Sandra's question, if ANSI is part of the qualification for whatever training or opportunities we have, if you've got performance-based assessments, performance-based training, and you've got ways of assessing that, that's not a psychometrician's dream now, right? Like we're not figuring out the validity of a test question. How do we reconcile those things? I guess.
That's a really good question. So we've been looking, and the system that we have right now, we wanted to focus initially on training, especially commercial training offerings and certifications. That's what there's abundance of. We're in a Tiger team working with our CAEs, our Cyber Centers of Excellence. Have over 400 of those membership there. Our senior military colleges are coming together in terms of how do we evaluate education, all right, from that level, and then put it into a box. Because if you look at the curriculum or syllabus, generally we kind of shy away from that because of how it's done in terms of competencies and some other things, and aligning that to the work roles. So we've joined in with that. And it's a small group right now to come up with that. And then we're looking at that piece. So if you have the capability of measuring demonstrated proficiency and capability, and it aligns, how do we measure that and check it? So that is the thing right now. Matter of fact, this week, or earlier this week and last week, I was looking at that and saying, now, how do I create a system to measure that, to open that up? So with all of these things, when we kick this off, it's kind of a race against time, right? To get as many opportunities out there and then to look at what the future needs to look at. So it's funny you should bring that up because I was looking at a system and I said, how do I measure this? How do I fairly say this system is good and this system is not? How do we align that? So my investment to get the initial offering up expires what I think is September. So before I ask him, I wanted to get the basic capability up, and then let's take that next step where we add those other things. So over the next 12 months, I hope to have have something where you can point to it and you can see it.
Okay, great. So,
In this particular instance for training, right, if you offer training, the opportunity, if you want to go into the site when it's published and look. So we say ANSI counts. It's not the only factor. We're not limiting the CAEs. So I limit CAEs for cyber scholarship offerings. You will use CAEs. So, but in terms of training, I don't dictate one way or the other. So it's about how is that qualified, how does it align, and even after we say that, we don't say you will use or don't use at an enterprise level. No, we're using the CAEs. It's a resource because we fund a lot of that, so if I'm spending government money, I might as well put it to work.
thank you.
Okay?
I think we want as many options as possible for the workforce. So we're not limiting, we're trying to actually give the authority responsibility to increase it.
Hello, good afternoon. So I noticed that you focused a lot on the 2210. So I'm the Deputy Director for the 38th Cyberspace Engineering and Installation Group. And I have 855s, 854s, 1550s.
Yep.
So are you looking at those as well?
So from an occupational series, we're looking strictly at work roles. So our work roles are occupational series agnostic.
Okay.
We use 2210s, but they comprise the largest percentage
Yes, fair.
of the cybersecurity and IT workforce. But the reality of it is, our focus is on the work roles themselves.
Okay, so I know that there was a tasker that came out for us to go up there and put those roles with the 2210s.
Right, that's the adjudication tasker.
That's the first part. So when are you going to hit the 855?
Actually, I'd have to look at the tasker wasn't for 2210s.
Oh, well, the one I got was.
So depending how it went down,
Okay.
it's probably wrong.
Okay.
And be happy to talk to you afterwards.
Okay, perfect.
Because the tasker was to code your entire cyberspace workforce.
Okay.
2210s,
Okay.
right, Mill and Civ,
Okay.
and 2210s are what we call a mandatory code.
Okay.
So there were 4 occupational series that were signed about a year and a half ago. These are mandatory codes, but the tasker was you look at the entire workforce.
Okay.
And I think a lot of people have misinterpreted that and said, oh, just these people we're looking at. So
I'll come talk to you.
I got a call, I'd be
Yeah,
happy
yeah,
to
yeah,
happy to help.
Yeah, I want to be at the table. Okay, my second question.
I'm sorry, one question per.
So I just came out of the keynote, and General Skinner presented a high school young man that is working for them. Are we looking at that as well?
Yes,
to-
yes, yes, and yes, and
Because,
yes,
you know,
and
they
yes.
don't all want to go to college, right? They just want
That is kind of I promise I won't go long, all right? But as a department, we do not have enough entry-level developmental positions. We just don't. And we're not going to hire our way out of this. You can't get at fully successful, a full performance level. You're going to have to grow your own, build your own bench. And that is a central part of our strategy, looking at how going down that. I would love to have a program to walk into a high school and say, hey, you don't want to wear a uniform? I still have a job for you. And oh, by the way, I'm going to train you, make you marketable, and you're going to walk right into a position within the Department of Defense. And if I can't place you, then I'm going to place you somewhere in our federal agencies, our sister agencies, or state, local government, right? The paradigm needs to flip. Supply and demand right now. I know, I had a few to drink before I came up here, but how do we flip that paradigm where flood the market with capability, drive down that insatiable demand? We're not going to get there because last we checked, I keep hearing the number, 700,000 openings across the continental U.S. All right, and we haven't looked broader. I have no problem with training somebody and watching them go out into the world and be successful because they're a living, talking billboard for I got my start in DoD and this is a great place to come.
Yeah. Right, and that's what I was going to say. The
They're
perfect opportunity.
perfect
there.
opportunity.
High school to, cyber expert military. So we do not have a recruiting problem in cyber in the mill side. We have a training problem because our pipeline is too narrow. We need to expand that. We need to scale it. But our selling point is come into the military, get your training, get your experience, and then go serve the country. So in whatever capacity that is. So I think that's a great model. And again, that's looking at it from a partnership, not from a 100% retention issue.
And that can be apprenticeships. There's different things to look at. And oh, by the way, it gives us an opportunity to go shop at places for talent that aren't fished out. Right now, everybody's looking in the same place and complaining, I can't find it. Well, there's a whole country to look at. And there's a lot of populations that you generally don't think of. I don't like the terms we currently use in terms of underserved. Let's go where the talent is. And if you've got the program, you know, I grew up in rural Alabama, right? So
Alabama's the border.
Alabama public schools, I can only go so far. Anyway, so if those opportunities had been available to me, man, I would have jumped on that, right? But if you don't know, there's no recruiters except the military recruiters fishing around there. You're not gonna look at it. In this day and age, in terms of our communication strategy, there's no reason why we can't kind of push that out and focus on it. And that's part of our strategy.
Good afternoon, Rob Lapham, headquarters at AFSOC. So I can appreciate the challenges you guys have, especially being a 2210 that has to hire 854s. It just doesn't. We have a heck of a time with that. With that said, I'd like to talk about the SSR, only because there's a lot of scuttlebutt running around, and
I can help you with that.
Yeah, everybody's saying something, and of course not at all in sync. So some of the things that have been brought up are, since it's agency based on whether or not it is or is not implemented and to what level, is how would you propose still having retention should people go to other agencies? The second part of that is kind of a broader explanation of the previous slide you had. Does that mean that everyone with a 451 would then be coded, or only for those vacancies? And if it is only for those vacancies, how do you?
No. So if you look at our total workforce, we've got 225,000 of that. 150,000 are military and civil. So your occupational series, other than the mandatory codes, is irrelevant. I've got 210 occupational series coded with a work role. That'll give you an idea. So it's about, are you doing work in the cyberspace arena, period, aligned to one of the 5 elements. And if you are, and soon to be the other 2 elements, and AI, data, software engineering, if you are, then you should be coded, because we're not going to get new occupational series developed overnight. There's not going to be OPM moves very deliberately in terms of there's a new data series that were put on there on the books, but if you look at that, there's nothing behind it. So how do you create and do this? Just like on the military side, where you have additional skill identifiers and track, this is very similar to that. I can't fix the qualification and the qualification program that OPM has in terms of the competitive service and some of those things, but what I can do is complement it with the capability to say, I'm going to bypass the problems, just like when you look at your workforce, you're like, yeah, I've got occupational series, why are they coded this way? That's not what they do. Well, I looked at the same thing, and that's why when we looked at the DCWF, we said, you're not using even the min quals for OPM consistently. You're just throwing this stuff around. I don't even know how you're doing it, and it doesn't reflect. And then when you have to do a job announcement, it's like, what is this? This isn't the job. And you wonder why you don't get what you need. It's about looking at that and saying, fine, OPM, you have to track it this way, DoD, you're going to track it this way. But if we code that, I can now look at it and say, this is the actual work and the skill set that I need. And you can make that complementary to the overall process. Now, for the special salary rates, there are a lot of scuttlebutt. Fact, VA was driving that. We had partnered with VA on some of these things, not that. They have not turned it on yet. OMB looked at it at the beginning of the year, because this came out in February, about that time period, and all the other federal agencies, their hair lit on fire, but they said, you've dropped this program down, you're talking about kicking it off in the middle of the budget year. Our budgets are fixed, we can't absorb this cost. And I think that working group that put it forward, even OPM, I'm kind of surprised, kind of missed that somebody might complain. So OMB has went back to each federal agency and said, do a cost estimate and come back to us in terms of participation. Now, we assisted the comptroller for DoD, but the comptroller has done its own assessment. We've recently talked to them. They are taking that assessment back to OMB, and OMB then will make the decision based on that. So it hasn't turned on yet, and frankly, in our discussion with OMB, I don't think they're going to okay it.
So let me also say this, we were part of the interagency team that actually talked to OMB about this. The grass is always greener somewhere else, it seems. Believe it or not, all the other federal agencies are very upset with DoD because we have cyber accepted service under Title 10, and we have our own incentive program, TLMS, under that, which actually is a higher paying than even this. So they are all upset with us of taking their talent over to DoD. So right now, we don't see in the data, again, I'm a data guy, I don't see in the data this mass exodus to the VA, because they might have this authority. They don't have the money. I've talked to their comptroller. They don't have it. So DoD, as you saw on our slides, we're not in favor of this. We are in favor of incentivizing by work roles. So don't misconstrue what we're saying. So we know we have a shortage. 30,000 is not going lower anytime soon. We have to address this. One of the methods we have is pay. But having said that, everybody here knows, look at all these companies back here. They're willing to give you a job in cybersecurity today for probably higher pay. So our advantage and our key, at least in DoD, is mission. You know, if you heard DISA talk, DISA's missions, NSA's missions, you heard General Nakasone this morning. Our mission is our key. And how do we communicate our total pay package? It's not just base pay. It's all the incentives we have, which we do not do a good job of informing the workforce of all those incentives, both on the mil side and on the civ side. So I think we have to do a better job of our communication with the prospective workforce and everything that we do offer.
I guess just for clarity, so I can take this back to some of my folks. So you had 451s up there, just using them as an example.
That work role.
Out of yes, correct. Out of vacancies that you have. So are you saying that then those incentives would apply to just the vacancies for the 451s?
Nope.
Okay, so it's specifically those cyber pieces of 451s.
Right, that's the work role.
So right. We look at, because we have the vacancy, we have the on hand, and we have the authorization and required, but authorization numbers. And we look at that delta, and then we incentivize that entire pool of workforce. So if it's 100 people in the total workforce authorized, we have 30 on hand, we're going to incentivize all 100 because we're hoping to get there.
But if you look at the overall numbers, the largest population on there was a little over 1,000. So you find that the numbers where you're most critical generally aren't your large. I got 5, 6, 10,000 of those. It's here, and those smaller groups, and that's the way it generally goes, where it's highly technical, what we call a low density skill set that has a high attrition rate. That's where you have to focus your dollars more so.
Yeah, tracking. It'd be something like OCOs or something like
that.
Yeah,
you got it.
Awesome. Hey, appreciate it.
Okay, last question. We have like 2 minutes left.
Hey, that's all. He has one of them anyway, so that's worked out. So implementation of this. I am G6 at Fort Benning for TRADOC. I'm having issues with LNEC and RNEX. LNEX and RNEX not adhere to 8140. They still want to go back to 8570. So is there? I know you saw that.
There's additional information. We're going to start some road shows and talk about 8570 sunsetted with this. And there's a gap, and if you look at it, so 24 months for your cybersecurity workforce, everybody else has 36 months to come in compliance. When 8570 first rolled out, you had over 5 years to come into compliance. So it's not, it was signed and suddenly you're all out of whack. And we've looked at it, and our estimate right now, only about 30% of the workforce is going to have to kind of highly scramble to get initial qualifications across that. So if they're still following it, I have a point of contact. We'd be happy to kind of touch base.
That'd be great.
All right, and we could help you and kind of should send you through the Army too to give you reinforcement.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
All right, so hey, thanks everybody. A lot of familiar faces out there. Again, this is a partnership, so we listen to our customer. We actually do. I try to be responsive, adaptive, and flexible. And I've never heard those 3 words in any other personnel system that I've been a member of. So we try to do that. We don't always make it, but at our level, that's what we're striving to do, and we're trying to be innovative in the process. So thank you all for your time, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you.